Engineering, Magic and Kitsune, Chapter 64. Jewel. Time slowed as John quickly went through his options and stared down the menacing man as he approached, each step leaving a small crater punched into the ground in his wake. The Unbound would obviously have an Igus, so most of his attacks likely wouldn't result in instant incapacitation. It would make lifting him with telekinesis nearly impossible, even if the sheer weight didn't. Lightning might work, but he was surely extending his Igus to the rock armor, blunting a bolt's effectiveness. Still, it might break through the rock and mess him up long enough to get something else going. Melting, it was a possibility if he could apply enough heat and weaken its protection. There were a good number of gaps where stone slid past stone, so he could probably use his cold focus to shatter the whole thing. At the very least, he might jam it up if he could get enough water in there first. Maybe he could trick him into falling into the well. His dual focus should punch right through. If there was anything he had designed it for, it was stubborn rock. But that would require being in melee range of someone with superhuman strength and a suit of granite power armor. Momentarily, John looked past the man to the devastation behind him, and a flare of righteous anger bubbled up in his gut. His focus had smothered most of the flames by dropping the area well below the ignition temperature, but what it revealed sent a shiver down his spine. The building had been full of books and scrolls before the attack, although even a few seconds of flame from a blast had already reduced most of them to cinders, half-burned pages and scraps wafting on the breeze. A mundane but well-used and loved desk sat in the middle of the room, shattered in two by the man's impact, upturned stone from the floor poking through it like an impaled corpse. Next to it, a charcoal-esque blackened shape that John refused to look at, even if the silhouette told him all he needed to know. Still, beneath the scent of bitter ash and the sound of cracking wood, John swore he could smell sickly burnt pork and hear sizzling meat. A small stone plate of armor shifted on the Unbound, and John's instinct screamed danger, prompting him to dodge to the side. The world drowned in crimson flames as the warding sprang to life, and the air was knocked out of him as he was suddenly careening through the air like an errant leaf. Stomach lurching and head spinning, he saw the ground coming up fast through blurred vision and pulled up. The warding took much of the hit, thankfully, although interacting with the surface with no texture would always feel strange, but the wind was still knocked out of him by the impact. Staggering to his feet, John blearily looked around as he tried to regain his bearings. The surroundings were unfamiliar. Gone were the burnt buildings and the plaza around the wall. A few moments later, his stumbling mind caught up, and John realized that he was on the next street over. People were slowly filtering out of their houses with pale looks of panic and fear on their faces as they looked around, more than a few glances landing on him. "Go! Get out of here! There's a madman killing people! I'll keep him on me!" John screamed out, pointing down the road before reloading the crossbow he had somehow kept grasp of during his fight. Uncertainty greeted his proclamation, although a few took his words to heart and sprinted off. Most froze or tensely looked around, and a few rushed back into their houses to get a family member, thinking they might be better served hunkering down. "Hell, I'll tear your fucking skin off and roll you in salt!" roared the Unbound with the force of a landslide. John could hear him stomping closer before the grand crash rang out as he started smashing through the buildings separating them. Shit! Any hesitancy evaporated like a morning mist, and now the crowd moved with purpose, swapping from gentle milling to a borderline stampede of bounding feet and shouts at a drop of a hat. Ideas spun through John's mind as he quickly formulated a plan of action. Taking stock of his surroundings, there was little of use, though. It seemed like he was on a primarily residential street, the path just wide enough for a pair of horse-drawn carts to pass by. His first instinct was to try and lose the man and get back to the well and complete his mission. The Unbound might have been dangerous, but John would bet that the man would be a lot less scary when he was flying through the air with an angry Kitsune at his side. Unfortunately, his small sample size of Unbound pointed to them having some degree of enhanced senses, making any attempt at sneaking away risky at best. No, he had to at least delay the bastard so that he could retreat somewhere better. Sadly, welding the joints of the Unbound's armor was probably a no-go, as if he could make a suit of rock armor to begin with, he could surely break the stone again and get it moving. John quickly pulled his welder out from his pocket and cranked up the dial to full power before blasting a section of the ground, softening it into a fluid before backing off, taking up a post and swapping his gauntlet's focus to lightning with a satisfying click. It was a shame this guy couldn't wait one more day so John could have his proper war gauntlet. The wall in front of John cracked as he positioned himself before a shape blurred from within, wood exploding outwards like shrapnel. It seemed like the slow effect had worn off. The figure was heading right towards John, but he stood strong, only taking a precautionary step to the side. John pointed. Of course, the man didn't account for there to be a foot-deep goopy sinkhole that just happened to look a lot like solid ground, and no amount of extra strength compensated for the unexpectedly having 0 legs planted. John positioned his fingers carefully, accounting for the lesser power of his gauntlet. It would be a lie to say that John took no pleasure in how the man's encased head loudly thunked against the ground like the stone tossed from a cliff. How the following crossbow thunked into his spine and slowed his blading to a near halt was a thing of beauty. John closed his eyes. The thick rock, being a natural insulator, posed a problem. Fortunately, the lightning focus had turned out to be a rather universal problem solver. He fired. Boom! Lightning sprang from his fingers in a resounding bolt, the crash deafening even through his warding as blinding white threatened to sear itself into his vision through his eyelids as what some might call the wrath of the heavens fell upon his target with glorious fury. John opened his eyes, surveying the charred, blackened land where his opponent lay, the arm had blasted apart by sheer force, revealing... The lightning had cracked the unbound sharp projectile open, but no stunned foe greeted him. No blood, no mess, just more rocks. It was a decoy. The bastard had made a facsimile of himself. His eyes widened as he tried to search for the threat, taking a step back. Smoke poured from where the rocky missile had emerged, obscuring the shattered remnants of what might have once been a home, like a thick fog, betraying no hint of danger lurking within. Shit, was he going to charge through, or would he try another tactic? Moreover, what was this man's ability set? As far as John could gather, Unbound tended towards a theme of some sort, but he wasn't sure what the geokinesis or explosions could possibly indicate. Of course, there was a chance that he was just lobbing explosives hidden inside his armor, using geokinesis, but that posed new, extra worrying issues. If he were carrying gunpowder bombs or the like, could John hit him with any sort of heat without consuming the entire block in flames? A feeling of impending doom settled on his shoulders as he looked around. The man was all flame and spite when he first showed up, but where was that now? The silence was unnerving. Perhaps he could bait him out. It was a cold, ugly thought that weighed uneasily in John's mind. But if he couldn't convince this man to stop, perhaps he could at least get him to give away his location. "Oh, who was your brother?" John asked as calmly as he could, voice echoing through the now deserted street. "I am not going to lie. I've heard more people than I'd prefer recently, and most of them didn't give me their names. Was he one of the 2 Unbound who attacked me when I was dealing with the Nameless? Perhaps one of the tax collectors? I'm happy to say that if he led those lot, he took off before we cracked down on them." The only warning he got was a sense of dread turning sharp like knives in his gullet before an armored hand erupted from the ground underneath him. But that split second was all he needed to leap back and make sure it only grabbed empty space. He could burrow through the ground like a fucking worm. "You killed Arakawa without even knowing," the armored man growled, pulling himself out of the road even as he spat. John couldn't help but notice that, around the man, the ground steamed with heat. Did he melt his way through the earth? John probably didn't even have to worry about the heat focus setting off explosives in his armor in that case. Assuming the heat focus would even be effective against someone like that to begin with. "I'm sorry for your loss," John said. He felt for the man on some level, he truly did, but much of that empathy was drowned under the weight of that charred, burnt figure back. He was getting off topic. Still, some small part of him hoped that this could be resolved without further violence, even if the rest screamed that there was no way in hell. The sheer potential for carnage was far too great. "Do you need help locating his remains so they can be returned to you?" A pause. The stone-covered man almost seeming to stagger in his unearthing. The world held still, as if stuck between seconds, unaware that time had continued its unceasing march forward. For an instant, John thought it might have worked. Then a stone fist with razor-thin spiked knuckles was blurring towards his face. He barely managed to juke to the side, turning a skull-crushing blow into a graze that still gave him a headache that sent him spinning. With a thunderous crash, the man smashed through the side of the building, to a chorus of snaps and cracks as the house immediately collapsed in on itself, thick wood giving way, making another family homeless in moments. Hopefully, nobody was inside. "I, Arakawa Oreo, will tear you limb from limb," the man roared out. "For my family, for Hideto!" Before the man could rise once more, John scrambled back where they came from, clambering over the debris to get himself clear as possible of the clearly crazed and unreasonable man while heading back to the well. He just had to get the Afuda. Then he could get the fuck out of here. No part of his mission required him to get in a punch-up with some bastard obsessed with revenge. John still didn't know who his brother was, and although the guilt gnawed at his soul, he had more pressing matters to deal with right now. An important note, OU somehow sensed John's location underground. Could he see through the ground? Perhaps hear him? Was the rock decoy just a way to get John to give up his location? At least John knew he still needed to breathe thanks to that reed in the well. Otherwise the man could just stay underground forever while harassing him with projectiles. Wait, if Kiku had capabilities like this on hand, why didn't she burrow directly into the fort? Questions for later. John rushed over to the well, peering into the depths, only to see that a boulder damn near the size of a cow blocked access to the Afuda. Glancing over, he saw his hover disc was half encased too, like OU had melted a solid hunk of stone and shoved it in. Cursing, he hurriedly swapped the focus from lightning to the drill. There was no way that Yuki hadn't heard the commotion with her senses. From there, she probably left Rin on guard and then started heading over to offer backup, although she'd likely be unable to help as is. But if John could remove the talisman, it'd suddenly be 2-1, soon to be 3-on-1 once Rin noticed the field was down. If he were really lucky, she was lurking somewhere nearby, waiting for that opportunity. Flexing his fingers, John manifested a 6-foot-long spinning auger from his fingers and plunged it into the offending stone, the glowing tip breaking easily through the dense stone in seconds. But that wasn't enough. He needed to chew it into small enough pieces that it all fell out of the way. Thankfully, the order magic did its job well and made the stone incredibly brittle and weak, making quick work of over 3 feet of solid stone as quickly as he could thrust and pivot the beam around. Yet, just as the chunks of stone fell away with a series of loud splashes, he was once more struck with an inexplicable feeling of gut-gnawing dread. A quick hop back was the only thing that saved him from being skewered by a spike as large as a horse. "What the hell happened to taking me alive?" John shouted, spinning back around, only to behold a blur rushing straight at him. The armored form of OU approaching far too fast for his liking. Time seemed to slow as his eyes widened. At the moment, John became aware of one very peculiar fact. The man had missed him by a hair's breadth earlier, hadn't he? With the inhuman speed and reactions that came with being unbound, shouldn't he have been able to course correct easily? Unless, of course, OU couldn't adjust his angle during these mad bull rushes. Was this one a feint like the first? Maybe, but if it were, John would be ready to start lancing through the surrounding earth to catch him. John raised his gauntlet and braced himself like a pikeman against a charge, and, at the last possible second, he summoned his drill once more, as wide and as long as he could, materializing it straight in front of OU's chest. Magically reinforced stone clashed with the glowing green lance in a flurry of sparks, and the sheer force slammed John back against the pillar, which had nearly impaled him, stars filling his vision as his ribs stung. He wasn't sure if anything had cracked. It felt like it had, and he was surely broken plenty of bones in his time, but for now, it didn't matter. He could still move. He could still fight. Through blurred vision, he witnessed a great stone mass in the shape of a man writhing like a wasp pinned with a needle as the improvised weapon dug into it. The length spun deeper by the moment, with guttural cracks as pulverized orange-hot dust was discarded through the channels. Arms reached, grasping frantically to try and grapple with him, but to no avail. The drill bit was far too long, and the order magic seemed to make the limbs rather difficult to move. The bit would pierce OU's guts through far before he got into reach. John's gaze flicked up to his face to meet his eyes, but in them he saw no fear, no panic. The grinding of stone caught his ear as the stone plate and the armor moved. In a wild panic, John slammed the drill onto the ground, sending the man sprawling face down into a rough heap, ensuring that he could not fire without blowing himself up too. But nothing came. It was only when a hand wrapped itself round John's ankle that he realized that he had slammed a person who could seemingly swim through stone and create rocky decoys against the ground. The world spun as OU twisted John with inhuman forces, his warding being the only thing to keep his skull intact as back of his head smashed onto the ground, brain rattling around his skull like he was tossed down a hill. He teetered on the edge of his consciousness as the edges of his vision went white. "Got you!" OU growled, climbing out of the ground like a terrible beast emerging from its winter burrow to feast it once more. Well, he could not see the man's grin under all that stone. John could hear the smug tone. Bringing his gauntlet up, John tried to impale the man upon the drill, But before he could summon the weapon, his arm was slammed into the ground, driving his fingers flat. "Stop squirming!" Oyu spat as John writhed, but the Unbound was just too damn strong. "We're going to have some fun, you and I!" This couldn't be happening. No, he had survived too much to get captured here. He wasn't afraid of the pain, at least not that much. No, the thing that made the bile rise in his throat and his heart thunder was the thought of what Kiko would do once she had him. Would he ever be himself again? Would he mindlessly throw it away on her projects for the rest of his life? Would she allow him moments of lucidity? Would it be a mercy if she didn't? His breathing caught as he tried to get away. But nothing worked. Nothing worked. No! He wouldn't go back to her. He'd rather die. Oyu grabbed John's gauntleted hand roughly before the Unbound started to twist. At first, it was almost gentle despite his rocky grip. "Nice weapon," he cruelly complimented, "but shame you won't get to use it again." Then he kept twisting. Red-hot agony flooded his mind as the torsion entirely bypassed his defenses, letting the man start to bend muscles and bone past any angle they were meant for. Sometimes pain brings clarity. And at that moment, John remembered that he had a very particular knife in his pocket, and an instinct-driven, half-formed plan came to mind. His arms were pinned, so he writhed and kicked so his blade fell from his pocket. Then he wiggled it free of its sheath with his elbow while the man was too busy with his arms. Then, just barely, he managed to lever it so that it was sticking up like a spike trap under the man's bulky stone armor. Now came the risky part. Sniffing deeply to make sure that it was a good one, John spat in the man's eye and gave him a good smuggest leer that he could imagine, despite his rapidly growing headache. It bounced off the Aegis, and most of it fell on John's face, but it was besides the point. "Cocky little shit, aren't you?" After all, if the impulsive Unbound wanted to wipe that smug look off John's face, he couldn't use his legs, nor could he risk releasing his captive's hands. Maybe Oyu could punish John with his geomancy, but would he think of that? The man reared back for a headbutt as John braced himself, wanting to close his eyes instinctively, but stopping himself lest he missed his opportunity. As the man's rocky forehead came down, his chest came lower in turn, and he twisted his torso to thrust the blade forward. As the blow sent John's head spinning, the hyper-sharp, magic-enhanced blade punched a small hole in the man's armor, and the seizing effect of order spread. Several things happened all at once. First off, the man's armor on the right side, the closest to the knife, stiffened, throwing him off balance while he was already in motion. In response, his arm shot out as he steadied himself. And just like that, John was free. He pointed a finger towards the Unbound and summoned his improvised weapon directly into the man's torso. The green bit materialized, spinning violently through magically protected stone as it fought its way to full length, pushing him off John into the air. The spire dug deeper and deeper, yet by the moment, until it finally met the Aegis upon the man's skin. A great sound like a machine steel pulling itself apart assaulted his ears with an unholy screech of metal on metal violence, sparks flying from the drill's channels as it dug deep into the man's underbelly. Then with a snap, the Aegis gave out, and a spray of blood and viscera started to pour from the hole. "I'll fucking kill you!" the man roared as his armor started to fall away. Face flushed with an unholy fury and madness in his eyes. Holes all over his armor tried to open. Emphasis on tried. With how they shuddered but barely moved, it seemed that the knife still stuck in his side was more than enough to stop the hatches he used. Did Oyu know that they weren't open? A sudden feeling of dread struck John right before the man detonated in a maelstrom of flame and rock like a demented fragmentation grenade. The blast wave reached him first, and blood roared in his ears like rushing rapids, flames engulfing his vision as rocks bounced off his prone form, the sheer force even through his warding pushing him down in a way that made him feel like he was... Wait, what happened? John stared up at the sky, some impossible dread coding in his gut. Had he passed out? Staggering to his feet, John looked around. He was in a small crater, which he had to stagger out of with a limp that he had suddenly developed. All around him, the explosion had burned the dirt, stone, and plants alike to a crisp, with the surrounding buildings coated in a layer of thick black ash. Large holes punched through the walls by the rocks. Thankfully, it didn't seem like anything had caught fire, somehow. John would say that Oyu's corpse was nowhere to be found, but it was all around him, wasn't it, mixed in with the raw devastation by his own hand. Looking into the distance, John saw... What the fuck even was that? In the distance was a pillar of something reaching up into the sky like a beacon. It hurt John's eyes to stare at it, as if his brain were failing to process it. He tried to squint, but it didn't help. Nothing did. Somehow, he could tell it was still there, burning away at him, even when he closed his eyes. It was like staring at an impossible color, but it felt like a truly seeing for the first time, like everything before had only been pale shadow projected onto a wall. Its colors were richer than he thought possible, lights brighter, shadows deeper than pure black. Yet he could see it all. Even at this distance, he saw more detail than he could behold by looking at the back of his own hand. John licked his dry lips and tasted coppery crimson, which had dripped from somewhere above, yet he couldn't tear his eyes away. Half was a tower of blood-red mist, flashes of white swimming through it like fish in the sea. It flowed. No, it moved like something alive and angry, like some violent demon was staring into the world through a cracked door. And the other half was familiar. Hauntingly so. Day and night, a sea of stars and darkness emanated from a full moon that held a haunting repose, and by its side was a glorious, radiant sun from which a sunny day spilled forth. It was like the two eyes of a god staring down at the world with both absolute hate and unceasing love. Was it Yuki doing that? Wait, was it the other one, Kiku? Was Yuki okay? Was Rin? He had to get over there now. Wait, he still had his mission. Coughing, he stumbled over towards a now-leveled well. He could see the hole, but there wasn't much left of the structure. Please let it be intact, John begged, before mumbling prayers to anyone who would listen as he headed up the wall. Every step was a fight as he dragged his leg. Come on! Come on! He peered into the depths, squinting his eyes, and right there, despite everything, he smiled as he pulled his gauntlet up, slotting his telekinetic focus into his glove and levitating the fat-looking paper envelope from the cavity. Grasping the paper that so many had died for, John popped it open and pulled the veritable scroll out. It was incomprehensible, sprawling. John felt like a child looking at an electrical diagram for the first time. What was comprehensible was the blank chunk where Kiku's name was inscribed, with room for more. Pulling out the bottle of special ink they had claimed from the shrine, John added a single stroke to Kiku's name, changing it into something entirely different. And below the defaced name, he wrote Yuki and Nagahama Rin, before tucking it back into an envelope and placing it back in his little cubby. Now he could go see what the fuck was going on. End of chapter. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Caspar Arnholtz, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.